The wind on the frontier has a way of carrying whispers. Whispers of death, of vengeance, of broken souls left to rot under the unforgiving sun. That morning, the rancher rode alone. His name was Elias Monroe, a man whose solitude had carved deep lines into his face. Years of tending cattle, mending fences, and burying ghosts had made him more shadow than flesh. His only companions were the creak of saddle leather and the hollow rhythm of hooves across dry earth. He wasn't riding toward anything that day. He was riding away from the echoes of his late wife's laughter, away from the son he had buried in a shallow grave near the cottonwoods. That's how life worked in the West. You didn't chase joy, you just outran the sorrow until your horse gave out. But the trail had its own designs. Elias reined in when he saw it, the silhouette of an old oak standing against the endless sky. At first, it was only the outline that struck him. The tree looked wrong, crooked, like it was bearing more than bark and branches. And as he drew closer, the sight froze him in the saddle. A child. A girl. Hanging limp from the bough. Her small body swayed with the wind, the noose cutting into her neck, skin already bruised purple against the rope. She could have been no older than 12, maybe 13. Her dark braids framed a face that still carried the softness of youth, though life had been stolen from it. Pinned to her dress was a board, crudely carved with a knife, letters scorched into wood like a brand of hatred. White man shows no mercy. Elias felt something tighten in his chest. The world seemed to fall silent around him, leaving only the rasp of his own breath. He had seen death before, plenty of it. Men shot over whiskey, families burned out of their homes, graves filled before the ground had time to cool. But this was no quarrel between grown men, no feud between neighbors. This was cruelty carved straight into the bones of the land. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching on the brittle grass. The smell of death was faint, but there. Coyotes hadn't come yet, but they would. The girl's bare feet dangled just above the dirt, toes pointed to nothing. Her eyes were closed, as if she had been put to sleep by violence itself. Elias touched the sign with a weathered hand, tracing the words. Rage and grief twisted in his gut like barbed wire. Whoever left her here wanted the world to see, wanted the message to be carried like wildfire. No mercy, no forgiveness, no future. He stood there for a long time, staring up at the child. For a man who had lost his own, it was as though the earth had opened another wound inside him. Finally, he reached for his knife. With deliberate care, he cut the rope and lowered her small body to the ground. He laid her gently beneath the tree, as if she were his own daughter, as if this barren frontier would deny her no more dignity. "Rest now, little one," he whispered, voice raw. But as he brushed the dust from her face, he saw something that made his breath hitch. Her eyelids fluttered. Elias froze. The girl wasn't dead. Her lips parted with the faintest rasp of air, and he realized the noose hadn't finished its work. Whoever strung her up had left her between life and death, as though the desert itself would decide her fate. And now, she was in his hands. Elias's heart thundered as he pressed 2 fingers to her throat. Faint. So faint. But there was a pulse. The rancher looked around, scanning the horizon. Whoever had done this could still be near. Whoever wanted her dead would not welcome a savior. But Elias Monroe had buried too many children to let the earth claim one more. He lifted the girl into his arms. She was light, too light, bones sharp against his calloused hands. The board with the carved message slipped from her dress and landed in the dirt. Elias glanced at it one last time, those words burning into his mind. White man shows no mercy. The rancher mounted his horse with the child held close, her shallow breaths brushing against his chest. He turned his gaze westward, where the sun was sinking in fire-red streaks. The trail had chosen him that day, and he knew Mercy or no? Mercy. Blood would be spilled before this story was through. The desert had a way of testing men, and Elias Monroe knew it well. He had endured droughts that starved his cattle, winters that froze his bones, and raids that left smoke trailing over the horizon. But nothing felt as heavy as the fragile weight of the girl in his arms. Her breath was shallow, her chest barely rising against his coat. Each gasp was a reminder that she was not gone yet, but clinging to life like a flame battered by the wind. Elias pressed his heels into the horses, flanks urging it forward. The animal sensed the urgency and stretched its stride, hooves pounding against the cracked earth. The rancher's eyes scanned the ridges, the brush, the shadows, anywhere danger might lurk. Whoever had done this would not want her alive. The West was not kind to witnesses. He rode hard until the silhouette of his ranch came into view, a lonely homestead at the edge of the world, where silence had been his only companion for too many years. The cabin, the barn, the dry corral. It was all there, waiting like a graveyard of forgotten dreams. He dismounted swiftly and carried the girl inside. The air was cooler within the cabin, thick with the smell of wood smoke and leather. Elias laid her on his bed, the same bed where once his wife had slept, before fever had stolen her. For a moment, memories tried to claw their way up his throat, but he pushed them down. There was no room for ghosts tonight. He fetched water from the basin, dampened a cloth, and pressed it gently to her lips. The girl stirred faintly, a moan, escaping her cracked throat. Elias spoke softly, voice low and steady, the way he used to soothe his cattle when storms rolled in. Easy now. You're safe here. Nobody's gonna hurt you anymore. Her eyelids flickered, and for the first time he saw her eyes. Dark, fierce, not the eyes of a child broken by cruelty, but the eyes of someone who had seen more than she should have. She tried to speak, but only a rasp came out. Elias held the cup of water to her lips and tilted it carefully. She drank in tiny gulps, as though each drop cost her strength. After a while, she whispered one word. Why? It struck him harder than a bullet. Why had she been left to hang? Why had the West turned on its own children? Why did cruelty find the weak so easily? Elias didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. Instead, he asked, "What's your name?" "Little one." Her eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering in them. To her, he was still a stranger, a white rancher, no different from those who carved hatred into wood and left her swinging from a tree. But at last, her voice cracked out a single syllable, "Naomi." Elias nodded, repeating it under his breath as though binding it to memory. Naomi. A name as delicate as the girl herself, yet carrying an iron weight. For hours he worked to nurse her. He cleaned the raw rope burns around her neck, rubbed salve on her cracked skin, fed her bits of broth from the pot simmering on the stove. She said little, and when she did, it was only fragments, words in Apache mixed with broken English. But her silence spoke louder than any words could. She had seen something, she had survived something, and whatever it was, it had left her with the kind of scars that didn't heal. When night fell, Elias lit a lantern and sat by her bedside. Outside, the coyotes howled in the distance, their cries twisting through the desert air like ghosts. He held his rifle across his knees, every sense sharpened, because he knew the West, he knew men. And he knew this wasn't finished. The men who left her on that tree had meant to send a message, carved into wood, burned into memory. And if they discovered she still breathed, they would come to silence her. Naomi stirred again, her small hand clutching at the blanket. Her lips moved, trembling with a whisper. "They will come." Elias leaned forward. "Who, Naomi? Who did this to you?" But her eyes shut tight, tears slipping down her cheeks. Whatever truth she carried was buried deep, locked away by fear and pain. The rancher sat back, the weight of her words heavy as lead. They will come. He tightened his grip on the rifle, jaw set like stone. If they came, they would find a man who had nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing left to lose was the most dangerous kind of all. The lantern flickered, shadows dancing across the cabin walls. Naomi slept fitfully, her breathing uneven. Elias sat awake, listening, waiting. Then, sometime past midnight, the sound came. A horse's whinny, the faint crunch of hooves. Men's voices carried low across the desert night. Elias rose slowly, every muscle coiled. His heart did not pound with fear, but with the grim calm of a man who had walked this road before. He checked Naomi one last time, then blew out the lantern. Darkness swallowed the cabin whole. The girl had said they would come, and now they had. The desert does not forgive noise. Out there, every crunch of a hoof, every jingle of a spur, every careless word carries for miles. That's why Elias Monroe knew the men weren't trying to be careful. They wanted him to hear them coming from the shadow of his cabin. Elias crouched by the window, rifle steady in his calloused hands. Through the faint moonlight, he counted them. 3 riders at first, dark shapes cutting across the horizon, then 2 more trailing behind. 5 in all. They reined in about 50 yards from the ranch, their horses restless, stamping against the dry earth. The men didn't dismount right away. They sat tall in their saddles, silhouettes against the star-flecked sky, as if surveying the place, as if daring him to show himself. Elias could not see their faces, but he didn't need to. He knew the type. He had seen their kind spill blood, in saloons, torch barns, and smile while families screamed. One of them, the largest of the bunch, cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted. His voice rolled across the night like a whip crack. "Monroe, we know you got her." The words sliced through the silence, into the marrow of the cabin. Naomi stirred on the bed, her small frame twitching at the sound. She knew that voice. Elias glanced at her, then back through the window. His lips pressed tight. The man shouted again. "That little Apache ain't yours to keep. She was meant for the crows." The others laughed, cruel and hollow. Elias's grip on the rifle tightened. He had questions burning in his mind. Why had they strung her up? What war were they trying to start? Why leave a child with a message carved in hate? But answers wouldn't come from words exchanged across the sand. Answers would come only through steel, lead, and blood. He breathed slow, steady, his cheek pressed to the worn wood of the rifle stock. He could almost feel his late son's ghost behind him, whispering the lessons he once taught him at the shooting range. Wait for the stillness. Don't waste a shot. Then, suddenly silence. The men had stopped laughing. The leader's voice came once more, quieter now, darker. "You got until the count of 10. Then we burn this shack to the ground and the both of you with it." Elias felt his stomach twist. He looked at Naomi again. She was awake now, eyes wide, fear trembling in her every breath. She mouthed something, a single word. "Don't." But Elias knew. There was no choice. Mercy had been buried long ago in this land. He whispered to her, low and steady. "Stay down. Don't move till I say." Then he cocked the rifle. Outside, the count began. 1. The men's voices carried in unison, mocking, gleeful. 2! The horses snorted and shifted. The desert air grew heavy, the night pressing in like a coffin lid. 3! Elias's finger curled against the trigger. His heartbeat slowed. Steady as a drum. 4! The leader's silhouette leaned forward, scanning the cabin. His arrogance was his weakness. 5! The rifle thundered. The leader's hat flew from his head as the bullet tore through his skull, dropping him from the saddle like a sack of grain. The horse screamed and bolted. The other riders cursed. Ducking for cover, Elias worked the lever and fired again. Another man clutched his shoulder, spun from the saddle, and hit the dirt hard. Dust exploded under him as he writhed in agony. The others drew iron, revolvers flashing in the moonlight. Bullets tore into the cabin walls, splintering wood, showering Elias with shards. He stayed low, calm, moving like a man who had seen gunfire carve through too many lives already. Naomi cried out as the glass shattered near her head. Elias barked, "Stay down!" and fired again, sending another rider sprawling, his body twisted in the dust. That left two. They circled wide, spurring their horses, shooting wild. The thunder of hooves, the acrid stench of gunpowder, the ragged cries of wounded. It all swirled together into chaos. Elias slipped from the window, grabbed his revolver and slid across the floor to the door. He knew staying holed up would only get Naomi killed. Kicking the door open, he burst into the night, revolver blazing. The suddenness caught one of the riders off guard. Elias's bullet slammed into his chest, knocking him from the saddle. The man gasped once, then lay still. The last rider wheeled his horse around, spitting curses, firing shot after shot. Elias dove behind a trough, bullets tearing through the wood, spraying him with splinters. He reloaded calm and fast, the way years of living on the edge had taught him. Then silence again. The rider had run out of bullets. Elias rose, revolver steady. The rider froze in his saddle, empty gun in hand. His face was young, younger than Elias expected. Barely more than a boy, with wild eyes and a cruel grin smeared across his lips. He spat into the dust and shouted, "You think saving her changes anything? You can't stop what's coming." "Old man?" Elias's eyes narrowed. "Then tell me, what's coming?" The boy only laughed. It was a laugh hollow and mad, a laugh that didn't belong to someone who expected to live through the night. "The land's burning, Monroe, and she's the spark." He tried to spur his horse, to flee into the darkness. Elias fired once. The boy toppled backward, hitting the ground with a dull thud. The desert fell quiet again. Smoke curled from the muzzle of Elias's revolver. The air stank of death. 4 bodies lay sprawled in the dirt, their shadows stretched long by the moonlight. The leader bled into the sand where Elias's first bullet had dropped him. Only one man still breathed, groaning in the dust where Elias had shot his shoulder. Elias strode over, revolver aimed down. The wounded man rolled onto his back, eyes wide with pain and fury. Blood seeped through his shirt. "You don't know what you've done," the man spat. Elias pressed the revolver barrel to his forehead. "Then tell me," the man coughed, sneered, and whispered, "The girl, she's marked. She don't belong to you. She don't belong to anyone. She's death walking, and you'll wish you left her hanging." Elias's jaw clenched. He pulled the trigger. The body went still. Only the sound of the wind remained, carrying dust across the ranch yard. Brushing over the fallen, Elias lowered the revolver, eyes heavy with the weight of what he'd just unleashed. He had saved Naomi from the rope, but in doing so, he had stirred a fire that was far from finished. He turned back toward the cabin. Through the shattered doorway, Naomi's small figure stood trembling, watching him with eyes wide as the stars. The blood, the bodies, the silence, all reflected in those eyes, and Elias knew. There was no turning back. The ranch smelled of blood and smoke. 4 bodies lay cooling in the dust, and Elias Monroe stood among them with the grim stillness of a man who had walked through too many wars. Inside the cabin, Naomi had not moved from the shadows of the doorway. Her thin frame was trembling, but her eyes, those dark, burning eyes, were fixed on the dead men, as if memorizing each face. She was not weeping, she was not screaming, she was studying. Elias sheathed his revolver and stepped toward her. He spoke softly, like he was approaching a wounded animal. "They're gone now. You're safe." But Naomi's voice cut through him like a blade. "No one is safe." The words did not sound like they belonged to a child. They sounded older, forged in fire and ash. Elias paused. For a moment, he saw not a girl of 13, but a survivor carved from tragedy. He crouched in front of her, searching her face. "Tell me, Naomi, what did they mean? Why did they hang you with that sign?" Her lips pressed tight. She shook, her head, braids falling across her shoulders. Elias pressed gently. "If I'm to protect you, I need to know." Her gaze snapped to him, fierce and defiant. "Protect me? You killed them. That's not protection. That's war." Elias's jaw tightened. He had no argument against her words. The West never dealt in protection, only in survival. Finally, Naomi spoke again, quieter this time, as though unsealing a truth too heavy to carry alone. "They came to my village. At night. Soldiers, ranchers, men who wore the cross around their necks and hate in their eyes. They said the land was theirs, that we had no right to breathe the same air. They took torches to our homes. My brothers fought. But bullets don't care how old you are." Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to go on. "They strung up the women, my mother, my aunt, even the little ones, left them for the sun. They called it a warning. White man shows no mercy." She pointed a shaking hand toward the sign, still lying in the dirt outside. "That's not just words, rancher. That's a vow. They carve it in wood, in skin, in blood. They'll kill anyone who dares to stand in their way." Elias felt his stomach knot. He had known cruelty. He had seen raids, massacres, men burned alive. But hearing it spill from the lips of a girl who should have been chasing rabbits in the grass, it carved something new into him. Something that burned deeper than rage. Naomi's eyes found his. "Why did you save me?" Elias drew a slow breath. He thought of his own son, buried on the hill by the cottonwoods. He thought of his wife's hand in his, cold as stone when the fever took her. He thought of all the graves that the desert held. "Because I couldn't bury another child," he said simply. Silence hung between them. Outside, the coyotes had grown bold, their howls circling closer, eager for carrion. The wind whistled through the broken boards of the cabin, carrying the scent of blood to every predator in the desert. Naomi straightened, her small shoulders stiff with a strength beyond her years. "They will come again. Not 5, not 10. Many. They will come until I'm dead." Elias's gaze hardened. "Then let them come." But Naomi shook her head. "You don't understand. This is bigger than you. Bigger than me. They don't just want me dead. They want me erased. If I live, I am proof. Proof of what they did. Proof of their lie." Elias stood, pacing the room. His boots thudded against the wood, each step echoing in the hollow cabin. He was a man who had lived in solitude for too long, a man who had buried his heart with his family. Yet here stood a girl who had nothing, and yet carried everything. Finally he stopped, staring at her. "Then maybe it's time their lies bled out into the dirt." Naomi tilted her head, studying him. For a moment the corners of her lips twitched, not in a smile but in something darker. Recognition. "You're like them," she whispered. Elias bristled. "No, I'm nothing like them." Her gaze didn't falter. "You killed without mercy tonight." Elias opened his mouth, then shut it. She was right. He hadn't offered mercy. He hadn't asked questions until after the killing. He hadn't spared even the wounded. The truth burned in his chest. But Naomi stepped closer, her small hand brushing against the barrel of his rifle, still warm from the gunfight. "That's why you'll survive. That's why I need you." Elias blinked, startled. "Need me?" Naomi's eyes glimmered with something dangerous, not childish fear, but a spark of vengeance. "They took everything from me, my family, my people, my world. You saved me from the rope, rancher, but you didn't just save me. You lit a fire." Her voice dropped, hard as stone. "And fire doesn't forgive." The words sank into Elias, like nails. He saw in her the very thing he had buried long ago, the hunger for retribution, the refusal to let the dead rest until the guilty joined them. Outside, the coyotes howled louder, as if echoing Naomi's vow. Elias sat heavily in his chair staring at the girl. No, not just a girl. She was the spark the boy had spoken of, the ember they feared. If she lived, she carried truth. If she lived, she carried vengeance. And vengeance in the West was more dangerous than any plague. He poured himself a drink, hand shaking slightly, as he lifted the glass. The whiskey burned his throat, but not as much as the fire in her eyes. Naomi whispered then, almost to herself, almost to the night. They showed no mercy. Then neither will I. Elias closed his eyes. He knew now, with bone-deep certainty, this wasn't just about saving a girl. This was about becoming part of a war that would drown the desert in blood. The night stretched long, as though the moon itself lingered to witness the blood that stained Elias Monroe's land. The coyotes circled the bodies but dared not approach, their yellow eyes flickering in the dark like lanterns of the damned. Inside the cabin, Naomi did not sleep. She sat cross-legged by the dying fire, her small frame rigid, her eyes burning brighter than the flames. Elias watched her from his chair, whiskey glass untouched in his hand. He had seen hardened gunmen stare into the abyss after killing their first man, but never a child, and yet Naomi was not broken. She was sharpening. "You should rest," Elias muttered, his voice gruff. Naomi turned her gaze to him. "I will rest when they're all dead." The fire cracked, sparks dancing, upward like spirits trying to escape the smoke. Elias felt a cold weight settle in his chest. He recognized her tone. He had spoken with that same steel once, when fever had stolen his wife and hunger had taken his boy. But vengeance had no mercy, no rest, no peace. It devoured. Still, he knew there was no turning her from it. By morning, the sun rose blood-red over the desert. The bodies outside were stiff, flies already buzzing over them. Elias dug shallow graves, his shovel biting into the hard earth. Naomi stood nearby, watching silently, her shadow long and thin against the dirt. "You bury them?" she asked at last. Elias grunted. "The desert don't need more bones above the ground. Even killers deserve dirt to cover their rot." Naomi's lips tightened. "Mercy." He leaned on the shovel, sweat dripping from his brow. No, mercy would have been letting them breathe. For a long while she said nothing. Then softly, "My people, we burn the bodies of those who bring shame, so their spirits wander forever, never resting." Elias met her eyes, and for a moment he considered setting the corpses to flame. But he shook his head. "The ground'll take them. The living's what matters now." Naomi looked past him, to the horizon where dust shimmered in the morning heat. Her voice was steady, almost chilling. "There are more, many more. These were only dogs sent to sniff the trail. The wolves will come next." Elias drove the shovel into the earth again. "Then we better be ready." That evening, Naomi spoke, more of her village. Her words painted horrors Elias had known too well. Men on horseback with torches, the thunder of gunfire, women screaming as flames swallowed their homes. She named names: Caldwell, Price, Weller, white ranchers who had joined hands with corrupt soldiers to cleanse the land of its native blood. Elias recognized those names. Men with land, money, and influence. Men who were untouchable in court, but bled like anyone else when the lead was hot. Naomi's eyes glittered when she said them. "They took my people. They left me to hang. But I lived. And because I lived, I will take them." Elias sat silent, the weight of her vow sinking into him. She wasn't just seeking revenge. She was carrying the burden of the dead. Every Apache child left in shallow graves. Every woman whose body swung from a tree, every warrior who had fallen in smoke and ash. Naomi's survival wasn't just an accident. It was a reckoning, and Elias knew he was now bound to it. The next day, they prepared. Elias saddled his horse, packing ammunition, food, and water. He offered Naomi a smaller horse from his corral, but she shook her head. "I ride with you." So he lifted her up, setting her before him in the saddle, her small hands gripping the horn tight. She carried no weapon, not yet, but Elias had seen the fire in her eyes. It was only a matter of time. As they rode from the ranch, Naomi turned once to look back. The cabin stood lonely against the sky, smoke trailing from its chimney, graves freshly dug by its side. She whispered something in Apache, too soft for Elias to catch. He didn't ask. Some words belonged to the dead. They rode for hours through the desert, silence stretching between them. At last, Naomi spoke. "They think I am a spark." Elias glanced at her, brow furrowed. "And what do you think?" Her gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. "They are right." The rancher felt a shiver crawl up his spine, though the sun beat hot against his neck. He saw now what the boy had meant in his final words. The land's burning, and she's the spark. Naomi wasn't just a survivor. She was a fire born from ashes, and whoever had tried to kill her had only given her a reason to burn brighter. Elias tightened his grip on the reins. He had set out that morning as a lonely rancher, a man with nothing but ghosts, but now he rode with a child who carried the weight of a nation's vengeance. And together, they would carve a trail of blood through the men who thought mercy was dead. That night, they camped under the stars. Elias sat cleaning his rifle, the firelight glinting on the barrel. Naomi sat across from him, knees tucked to her chest, staring into the flames. She spoke at last. "Will you teach me?" Elias looked up. "Teach you what?" Her eyes lifted to his, steady as steel. "To shoot. To kill." For a long moment, he said nothing. He saw the child she still was, fragile and thin. But he also saw the woman she would become. Forged in fire, tempered in blood, unbending at last. He nodded. At first light, Naomi's lips curved, not in a smile, but in something sharper, a promise. The coyotes howled in the distance, the wind whispered across the plains, and the fire crackled, its sparks dancing into the night sky, rising higher and higher, like the vengeance that now burned in her eyes. Elias Monroe knew then, with a certainty that chilled him, the West would never forget the day he cut a girl down from a tree. Because that day he hadn't just saved her life, he had unleashed her wrath.